Derek walked the cracked streets, his eyes half-lidded from exhaustion, his mind numb from the weight of a life that seemed to slip further from his grasp with every passing day. He had never imagined that the world would look this way. The bustling city that had once been alive with the sounds of honking cars, the chatter of crowded markets, and the hum of industry was now silent, save for the occasional gust of wind that whipped through the empty streets. The collapse had come swiftly. Just a few years ago, the world seemed to be on top of everything. People had jobs, families, and hope. But then the wars started. The ones over water, over resources, over land. Governments crumbled, economies broke, and what was left of civilization turned on itself. Derek had once been a proud factory worker, part of the labor force that kept the machines running, that built the things people needed. But that was before the factory closed, before the layoffs, before the fights for scraps of food became a regular part of life. Now Derek wandered from one abandoned building to the next, picking through the remnants of a once thriving society. He never found much, but it was enough to keep him going. A half-eaten sandwich here, a few cans of food there. He had learned how to survive, but surviving wasn't living. Not anymore. He pulled his jacket tighter against the cold, his breath misting in the air. He could hear the faint hum of electricity in the distance. Somewhere there were still power lines working, though it was only in the wealthiest parts of the city. Not that it mattered to Derek. He was far from those places. He was in the part of the city where people fought for every scrap, where survival was a game of chance, and where hope had long since died. He turned a corner and froze. Something about the alleyway ahead caught his attention. At first, it seemed like another pile of discarded garbage, but as he stepped closer, he realized it was different. It was a post, an old, weathered wooden post, standing upright in the middle of the street. There was nothing around it, just the post. And tied to it was something, or rather someone. Derek blinked in disbelief. At first he thought it was just another homeless person, someone left to rot in the city's decaying heart. But as he moved closer, he saw that it wasn't a person at all. It was an alien. Or at least it looked like one. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, though her features were unlike anything Derek had ever seen. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, a soft, iridescent glow that made her seem otherworldly. Her long hair was the color of pale silver, flowing down to her shoulders in waves. Her face, delicate and smooth, looked almost ethereal, and her violet eyes, striking and deep, shone brightly even in the low light. She was tied to the post with thick ropes, but the way she held herself, even in such a position, was calm, almost regal. Derek took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to her. There was something in her gaze, something that pulled him forward, despite the confusion that bubbled up inside him. His first thought was that it was some kind of trap, some kind of cruel joke played by those who had turned this city into a wasteland. But there was no laughter, no mocking voices, just the quiet stillness of the night. He looked around, checking for anyone who might be watching, but the street was empty. No one else was around. Just the alien girl tied to the post. He hesitated. There had to be a reason she was here, why she was left in such a strange, vulnerable position. The sign attached to the post caught his eye. It was written in strange symbols that he didn't recognize, but below the symbols were words that were clear enough. Take as you please. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But still, Derek found himself walking toward her. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because of the way she looked at him, or maybe it was because he was so tired of being alone in a world that had abandoned him. Maybe for the first time in what felt like years, he saw something that wasn't just a pile of discarded rubbish or a broken building. He saw a possibility, a chance. He stood in front of her, unsure of what to do next. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. The sound of his breathing was the only noise he could hear, the only thing that felt real. And then, Almost as if she sensed his confusion, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, like music flowing through the air. "Please," she said, her words strange but understandable. "Help me." Derek's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what he was doing, but something inside him, some instinct he couldn't explain, told him to act. He reached out and began to untie the ropes that bound her to the post. The ropes were thick, but they gave way easily under his touch. As he worked, the alien girl remained still, her violet eyes locked onto his, never breaking their gaze. Once the ropes were undone, she stood up slowly, her movements graceful, as if she had never been tied at all. Derek stepped back, taking in the sight of her, the way her body seemed to shimmer under the weak streetlights. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, beautiful, yes, but also otherworldly. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. He couldn't help it. He was scared, but he was also mesmerized. The reality of what was happening was just beginning to sink in. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice soft but filled with an odd authority. "I come from a world far from here." Derek's mind raced. A world far from here. What did that even mean? But before he could ask another question, she spoke again. "I am not here to harm you. I only seek refuge. I am lost, and I need your help to find my way home." Derek didn't know what to say. He had no idea how he could help her. He had no resources, no plan, no way to even begin to understand what she was talking about. But something told him that this wasn't just some chance encounter. Something told him that Lyra was important, that this moment was the start of something much bigger than he could imagine. "I don't know how I can help you," Derek said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll try, I'll help you." Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time she smiled. A small, gentle smile that made Derek's chest tighten. It wasn't the smile of someone who had been freed, but the smile of someone who had found hope, even in the darkest of times. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is all I ask." For a long moment they stood there, the city around them forgotten, the world outside of this small encounter fading away. Derek had no idea what the future held, but in that moment, as he looked at Lyra and saw the quiet trust in her eyes, he realized something. The world might be broken, but it wasn't beyond repair. And maybe, just maybe together, they could find a way to fix it. Derek wasn't sure how long he had been walking with Lyra, but the streets of the city seemed to stretch on endlessly. The crumbling buildings around them were a constant reminder of what had happened to the world. The once bustling metropolis had become nothing more than a graveyard of forgotten hopes and shattered dreams. But even as the weight of that reality pressed down on him, there was something different now. Something that made him feel like there might still be a way out of all of this. Lyra walked beside him, her steps light and effortless, as if she didn't notice the chaos around her. She moved with the kind of grace Derek had only ever seen in movies, her long silver hair flowing behind her like a river of light. Her eyes, still glowing a soft violet, darted around the decaying city, yet she seemed oddly unbothered by the desolate state of the world. Derek couldn't help but watch her as she moved, as though she were a part of something bigger, something that didn't belong here in this broken world. He had so many questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why was she here in a place so far from her own world? But he didn't ask. He could tell that Lyra wasn't ready to share everything with him, at least not yet. There was something about her, something distant, something that made her seem more like a visitor than someone who truly belonged. They had walked for what felt like hours, the only sound being the soft shuffle of their footsteps against the cracked pavement. The city, once alive with the noise of machines and people, was now eerily quiet, as if it, too, had given up. Derek wanted to break the silence. He needed to know more about Lyra to understand what she was, what she could do. But he didn't know where to start. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra spoke. "Derek," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I know you have many questions. I understand why. I have not shared much with you, but I will tell you what I can." Derek turned to look at her, surprised that she had read his thoughts so easily. It was strange how easily she understood him, even though they hadn't known each other for long. "I come from a place far beyond your world," Lyra continued, her gaze drifting to the horizon, where the last remnants of the sun were setting. "A planet called Elios in a distant galaxy. Elios was once a thriving world, full of beauty and knowledge. But it was destroyed, torn apart by forces we could not control." Derek's heart sank. He had heard stories, rumors of aliens who came to Earth in the past, but he never thought he'd meet one. And now he was standing next to her, someone who had come from the stars, someone who had witnessed the end of her own world. "What happened?" Derek asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How did your world fall apart?" Lyra paused for a moment, her eyes clouded with a memory too painful to share. When she spoke again, her voice was tinged with sorrow. "It was not a war," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was a failure of our own doing. We were a peaceful people, but we became too focused on our own advancement. We pushed too far, too fast, without understanding the consequences. We unlocked powers that we could not control. Our planet was destroyed because of it." Derek felt a knot form in his stomach. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Lyra and her people, to have everything they knew, everything they loved, ripped away in an instant. "I was one of the last to leave," she continued, her voice quiet now, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I was sent here with a mission, though I do not remember the details. My memories are fragmented, scattered. I only know that I was meant to find someone who could help me, someone who could restore what was lost. I do not know why it was you, Derek, but I trust that you are the one who can help." Derek took a deep breath, trying to process everything she had said. He had no idea what he could do to help her, to fix the damage that had been done to her world. He was just a man who had spent the last few years scraping by in a world that had forgotten what hope looked like. But something inside him stirred. Maybe it wasn't too late for him to make a difference. Maybe, just maybe, helping Lyra would be the way to restore not just her world but his as well. "Do you remember anything else?" Derek asked, his voice full of curiosity. "Anything that could help us?" Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes deep and searching. "There are fragments of my memories," she said slowly, "but they are not clear. There is one thing, though, a key to everything. I know it is somewhere on your planet. I don't know what it is or where it is, but it is the key to restoring balance, to saving what is left of your world as well as mine." Derek frowned. A key. It sounded so vague, so impossible. How could he possibly find something like that? And what was it supposed to unlock? "I don't understand," Derek admitted, his voice laced with frustration. "How am I supposed to help you find this key? I don't even know where to start." Lyra smiled softly, her expression filled with a quiet understanding. "You will know when the time is right. Trust yourself, Derek. You will not be alone." The words felt like a reassurance, but they also felt like a challenge. Derek didn't know how he was supposed to find this key, but he did know one thing: he couldn't turn back now. He had already made the choice to help her, to step into the unknown, and he wasn't about to back out. As they continued walking, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It was as if the city itself was alive, breathing down their necks, waiting for them to make a mistake. Every shadow seemed to flicker with movement. Every creak of the wind seemed to carry a warning. Lyra, however, seemed unaffected. She walked with a calmness that Derek envied, her steps steady and confident. She didn't seem to notice the danger that seemed to pulse through the air, but Derek could feel it. There was something out there, something that didn't want them to succeed. And though he didn't know what it was, he knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone in this world. "We have to find the key," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I believe it is close, Derek, very close." Derek nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't know what they were up against, but he knew that this journey, this strange adventure, was his chance to do something meaningful. He had been lost for so long, just trying to survive, trying to find a reason to keep going. But now, with Lyra by his side, he felt a spark of hope that he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead was uncertain. The future was unclear. But for the first time in a long while, Derek felt like he was walking towards something that mattered. And no matter what it took, he was going to see this through. Derek's mind was racing as he walked beside Lyra through the barren city. The idea that he could somehow help her, help fix what was broken in this world, felt almost impossible. But her presence next to him made the impossible seem possible. Every time he looked at her, there was this feeling inside him that he had never felt before, hope. And as they continued their journey, that hope only seemed to grow. The streets they were walking through were empty, save for the occasional rustling of wind blowing through the remains of what once were busy markets, stores, and homes. The city had been reduced to ruins, its skeleton still standing tall, but its heart was gone. The people who had once called this place home were either scattered across the land or gone altogether, leaving only memories and silence. Derek felt the weight of the world pressing on him. Not only was he dealing with his own fears and doubts, but now there was Lyra to consider, too. He had promised to help her, to find the mysterious key she spoke of, but where could they even begin looking? The whole planet was in chaos, and a key, whatever it was, could be anywhere. Despite the uncertainty, Derek pressed on. Lyra's presence gave him a sense of purpose. She was calm, always walking with grace, her silver hair catching the fading light of the day as it cascaded around her shoulders. She seemed at ease, as if she had done this 1,000 times, as if the world's collapse didn't affect her the way it affected everyone else. It was almost as if Lyra didn't belong to this world at all. Derek had often thought of her as something beyond human, as if she were a visitor from another time, or another realm entirely. And yet every time she spoke, every time she turned to him with those violet eyes, he saw something familiar. She wasn't just an alien, an outsider. She was someone who had lost everything just like him. "We're getting closer," Lyra said, her voice soft but steady, pulling Derek from his thoughts. "I can feel it." Derek turned to her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Closer to what? The key?" Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "Yes. I don't know where it is exactly, but I can sense it, Derek. It's here. It's somewhere near." Derek didn't know how to feel. He had been hearing Lyra talk about this key for days now, and while it sounded important, he still didn't understand what it actually was. Was it some kind of object, a person, or perhaps something else entirely? Lyra had told him very little about it, only that it could save her world and Earth, and that was enough to keep him going. It wasn't much, but it was something. As they moved through the city, the eerie silence around them grew louder, and Derek couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner they turned, every alley they passed, seemed to carry the weight of hidden eyes. He glanced over at Lyra, but she didn't seem concerned. She walked with an air of quiet confidence, as if the world itself could do nothing to her. It was as if she knew something he didn't, something that made her feel invincible. Derek wasn't so sure. He had seen enough of the broken world to know that nothing was ever truly safe. The gangs that roamed the streets were brutal and ruthless, and Derek had narrowly escaped their grasp more times than he cared to count. But Lyra seemed oblivious to the danger around them, moving with the ease of someone who had nothing to fear. It wasn't until they turned down a narrow street that Derek felt a shift in the air. The tension was palpable, and for the first time since meeting Lyra, he felt a deep sense of dread settle in his stomach. Something was wrong. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Derek's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, his eyes scanning the shadows that clung to the corners of the street. It was then that he saw them, figures emerging from the darkness, cloaked in black and moving with deadly precision. The first one stepped forward, a tall man with a scar running down his face. His eyes gleamed with malice as he watched Derek and Lyra, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. Behind him, several more figures appeared, all armed and ready. Derek took a step back, instinctively putting himself between Lyra and the men who were now closing in. He had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but he could sense that they were dangerous. This was no chance encounter. They were after something, and it was clear that Lyra was their target. "You don't belong here," the man with the scar said, his voice cold and sharp. "Neither of you." Lyra stood still, her eyes locked on the man, her face unreadable. Derek couldn't understand how she could remain so calm, so composed. He wanted to run, to fight, to do anything to protect her, but his body was frozen in place. These men had weapons. They had the advantage. "We're not here for trouble," Derek said, his voice shaking slightly. "Just let us go. We don't want any trouble." The man laughed, a cruel sound that sent a shiver down Derek's spine. "You think you can just walk away? No one leaves when we're involved. Not without consequences." Lyra's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since they had met, Derek saw a flicker of something fierce in her gaze. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, as if she had been prepared for the inevitable encounter all along. Without warning, Lyra raised her hand, her fingers glowing faintly with a strange energy. The men took a step back, their expressions confused as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Derek watched in awe as Lyra's energy grew stronger, her entire body humming with power. The scarred man's eyes widened, and he raised his weapon. But before he could fire, Lyra's energy surged forward in a brilliant burst of light, knocking the gun from his hand and sending the other men stumbling back in fear. Derek stood frozen, his heart racing in his chest as he realized that the girl he had been walking beside for days was no ordinary being. She was something far beyond anything he had ever known. "Go," Lyra said, her voice sharp and commanding. Derek didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, his legs carrying him as fast as they could, with Lyra close behind. They didn't look back. The sounds of the men shouting faded into the distance as they pushed through the streets, not stopping until they had reached a safe, quiet alley. Breathing heavily, Derek turned to Lyra, his mind racing. What was that? How did you do that?" Lyra looked at him, her expression calm once more. "I'm not like them," she said softly. "I was sent here to protect what remains of this world. I will do whatever it takes to find the key and restore balance." Derek stared at her, still trying to wrap his mind around everything that had just happened. It felt like his whole world had been turned upside down, and he wasn't sure if he could handle it. "We need to keep moving," Lyra said, her voice steady as though nothing had happened. "The key is closer now. I can feel it. It's only a matter of time before we find it." Derek nodded, though his mind was spinning. He didn't know what kind of trouble they were in now, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't back out. Not now. Not when the world, his world, was still hanging by a thread. And maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to do something important, something that could change everything. They walked on, side by side, through the crumbling city, toward whatever awaited them next. Derek didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose. And as long as Lyra was with him, maybe, just maybe, they could still save this broken world.